Okay, hi everybody, and thank you for attending today's webinar on working with layers in PaintShop Pro. Um, I'm here with Brad Barton, who you might remember from the PaintShop Pro 2018 launch webinar, if you attended that back in August, as he demoed some of the new features of PaintShop Pro 2018. So he's going to spend the next 45 minutes or so teaching you all about using layers in PaintShop Pro as he puts together a composition of his own. And we're going to try to do our best to answer any questions that you might have, so feel free to answer questions in the chat at any time. I'm probably not going to interrupt his demo as you ask questions or as they come in, but if we've got some time left over at the end, I'll definitely try my best to tackle questions. And if we don't get through them all, then I'll send out a follow-up email with answers to any questions that we didn't address. So before I introduce you to Brad, I just wanted to let you know about the incentives that we have for you today for attending the webinar. So as a thank you, I'll be sending the details in that follow-up email tomorrow that you'll be entitled to a 40% discount on purchase or upgrade of PaintShop Pro 2018 or PaintShop Pro 2018 Ultimate. Plus, I'll be offering you a minimum of 25% off anything in PaintShop Pro 2018's Welcome tab. So that's applications, creative content, plugins, scripts, etc. So look for those details in tomorrow's email. And that's actually when I say a minimum of 25% off, it's actually an additional 25% off of any other discounts that are in that welcome book. And because it's our Black November period, there's going to be some deep discounts. So please check that out. I'll also be posting a recording of this webinar to YouTube in the next couple of days. So I don't even think I introduced myself. I'm Melanie Hyde. I'm the product marketing manager for the photo products at Corel. And Brad, for those of you who don't know him, he's a PaintShop professional. He's been using PaintShop Pro for many years, so he has an intimate knowledge of PaintShop Pro's tool set. He holds a Master of Photography and Photographic Craftsman degrees from Professional Photographers of America. And without further ado, I'm going to pass things over to Brad now. So give me a second to change the presenter. Okay.
All right. I think it should be there now. Excellent.
Go.
Well, as Melanie said, I've been using PaintShop Pro for many, many years, pretty much from the beginning of the software back in the early 90s. So I've been familiar with tools for a long time. We're going to go over layers today, and if you're not familiar with layers already, think of it as kind of a digital version of paper dolls where you have different pieces that lay on top of one another and you can rearrange them however you need them. Only because we're all digital, we can also change the transparency level of them. We can make them more transparent, less transparent. We can change how the layers blend together as well. And we're going to go through a couple examples here. My primary business is headshots, and one of the things I do is take a headshot like this one here. And let me change my screen up just a little bit so I can see my layers palette on the side. I take headshots like this one in the studio, but then I want to add a little more depth to it. So what I want to do here for this headshot is going to be to add a background to it. And right now I just have the one layer, as you can see over here on the right, and that is marked as my background layer. What I'm going to do first is duplicate that layer so that I have two copies of it. And it's just basically the same layer. I can use this button here to turn on and off the opacity, and nothing's going to change as I click on those buttons right now because they're exactly the same. I'm going to go into Topaz Labs here and choose their masking tool to cut out this headshot from the background. I'm leaving the other background, or leaving the other copy of this headshot in the background because I'll show you why in a few moments. Topaz Remask lets me paint in here where everything's purple is where it's going to do a computation for its cutout, and where it's green is going to what it's going to keep, and where it's red is what it's going to cut away. Now this doesn't have to be a perfect cutout for what we're going to do, so I'm not going to go through and fine-tune this, but there's tools in here where you can fine-tune this as well. Topaz Tools is available through the shop, I think, on the PaintShop Pro home screens. All right, now if I turn off this background layer, you'll see that I've got a nice cutout version of Ms. Erin here, so that I can drop in any background I want to. I've got two different ones I thought of using here. We'll see which one looks best here, which one we like better. It all depends on the mood you're going after. So this first one, I'm going to copy this to the clipboard so I can paste it in over here. I'm pasting it between those two layers. Now it's a little smaller than my overall image, which also doesn't matter because I'm going to blur it in a minute. But I can use this tool to transform to bring it a larger size. Now the realism is kind of lost because its colors are different, its saturation level is different. But I'm going to use these blending layers, and there's all kinds of different layers, and you can play with it, see which kind of layers you like, or see which effects you like best from the different layers. But for this one, it's going to be an overlay layer, and once that's done, I'll turn off the top layer, is just given a blending mode. It's given it, I forget exactly what the overlay is supposed to do, but it allows part of that background to see through the image that I've pasted on top here of the alleyway. And now in addition, I'm going to blur this alleyway. I'm going to take it Gaussian blur up to 100%. Well, let's go to multiply mode actually. I think it's going to look a little better with the darker background. And the whole idea here is it gives a bit of a dimension to it, to the background for her and for the headshot, to make her pop off that screen just a little bit more than it would have with just that gray background. There's one more thing I would do to this particular headshot as well, and I'm going to use one of these automated scripts that I've written. I'll share these with Melanie later on, so that you can use them yourself if you want. I call this one Eyes, and all this has done is create multiple copies of this background layer. I flattened it all down first to make it all one layer again, but made multiple copies of these background layers, and this middle layer here, it's done a high pass sharpen on. You can see the difference between the two of them as I turn that top layer on and off. All I'm going to do with that background though is come in here close on the eyes, and I'm going to erase around the irises of the eyes here, just to sharpen up just the eyes alone. If my mouse comes out, there it is. I'm just going to erase in here into the irises, and it makes a very subtle difference. I can turn on and off that layer. You can see the difference it made. Just in the eyes, though, because that's the only part I erased. And then I'm going to take a white paintbrush with a 20% opacity and soft light to add just a little bit extra highlight right here in the bottom of her eye on that same layer. And that just makes the eyes pop off just a little bit. And I do that all through an additional layer underneath, so I can turn it on and off, and I can also change the opacity of that layer so the effect is stronger or weaker. And that's what I would do for that headshot. Now, if you want to get into a little more complicated example, I guess I could have dropped the other headshot or the other background in, but I didn't do that. Go into a more complicated example. We want to build this composite image, and it's made up of multiple pieces. This is actually a self-portrait. I do a self-portrait project every month. It gets posted as my Facebook profile image. We're going to start with this background. Actually, let's bring all the pieces in over here to the editor right away. Now, for the mood of this image, I wanted to have a little bit darker cloud base than the bright sunny day that's up here. So I grabbed these clouds. Again, I'm going to copy that to my clipboard. Don't need that file anymore, so I'll close that window. Copy that to my clipboard, and I want to change that up into here where the white fluffy clouds and blue sky are. And I'm going to do that with the Smart Selection brush. I'm just going to highlight up here into this area. And then I'm going to use the masking tool. Now masks are great because let me do this real fast. I'm going to say I want to hide the selection I just made. Masks are great. If you can see this white layer right here, this white and black layer right here, everything that's white, it's going to keep. Everything that's black, it's going to hide, so that I can now drop in that, let me change position on my layer palette. I'm going to paste in as a new layer, the cloud layer that I just had, and I'm going to drag that down behind my background that I just created. So now I've changed the clouds up just a little bit. I want to change the size of it so it just fills that little area right there. I want to bring that white section of the clouds up a little bit so it looks like it's still lighting it properly. The light's still coming from the right direction, that's what I'm trying to say. Now if I go back in here and I turn this mask layer off again, the blue sky will come back. Or I can keep that cloud there. Now the second thing I wanted to do with this is to take this clock face. I'm going to copy it to the clipboard again. This clock face has already been cut out as well. Take this clock face and I want to bury it here in my background. And I'm going to do that by selecting my background layer. And now I've got, no, I don't have it yet. Now I have the point-to-point brush, and I've got it set to Smart Edge. And you see this ridge right here along this background that naturally is here. I'm going to cut out along that ridge. I'm making a selection. This part doesn't matter over here. And what I want to do is now promote that selection to a new layer. And if you can see over here, let's drag it to the top also. I'll turn off the other two layers, and you can see what I've left with is just that foreground portion of this background. And the reason for that is I'm going to put that clock face right here in between it. Now the clock face is very much bigger than the image I had to work with, so I'm going to have to come in here again and do a resize. And I can drag and place, reposition it to get it positioned exactly where I want it to be in that background. Now because I did that cutout there and promoted this layer up to the top, it's blocking the bottom half of the clock. The background layer is showing up behind the clock, and then the clouds are showing up behind that. It's all about stacking these things together. And I get this clock position just a little bit better. Now to add just a little bit of realism to this, you notice on my original image I have this shadow here that's being cast by this edge of the cliff face. So I want to carry that shadow onto the clock. And I'm going to do that by creating a new raster layer. I'm going to change to my eyedropper tool to get a color. I want to get a color of this shadow right here, so that I'm using the same color. Then switch to my paintbrush, resize it just a little bit, and I'm just going to paint in, oops, I'm still in soft light, give me a second. Go back to a normal brush. I'm just going to paint in right here along the clock. To match up kind of with that shadow. I'm going to change that blend mode to multiply also because it gives me a nice dark feel to it. Let's trim up that shadow just a little bit. It doesn't look right yet. And now one of the other things I said before that you can do, you can change the transparency level of a layer. Let me go back to normal a little bit so you can see better what it is that this is doing. I'm going to trim this shadow off right here. As I changed this number here, it says 100. That says 100 right now. That means it's completely opaque. You can't see through it at all. If I can change this all the way down to 0, and it would disappear completely, or anywhere in between. As you can see, it comes in and out. Right now it's at 77%. Changing that to multiply also, and 77%. Actually, 77% is just about right. Now the contrast that's in the shadow here that I just painted on the clock is very similar to the shadow that's down here on the ground, so it's matching up fairly well. There's another piece that I want to add shadow-wise too to make it look a little more realistic, like the clock is actually buried here in the sand, in the ground. Is it needs just a hint of a shadow right along this edge. So I've created another layer still underneath that front foreground layer, and I'm going to paint in again with that same color we used a minute ago, only a little smaller brush this time. I'm just going to grab just a bare edge right along there to give me just a hint of a shadow along this edge. Again, I'm going to change it to multiply and down to about 77%. Actually, it's going to be a little less than 77%. And that just adds just a little bit of shadow. It looks like it's just a little big. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to actually resize that layer just a little bit so that the shadow is a little less prominent. Now again, my sunlight's coming down from this direction, so I need to add a little bit of a shadow in front on this foreground layer as well that the clock face might be casting in this particular case. So again, I'm using that same color. I'm going to come in here on the foreground layer, and I'm going to overlap just a little bit above the foreground layer, and I'll show you how I can fix that in a moment. But for the moment, I'm just going to paint this layer in here. Again, go to multiply mode, change the opacity down so it matches similar contrast that's in the shadow over this side. Now it doesn't need to be on the front of the clock here, so I'm going to select this layer here, choose my magic wand tool, which will select everything except this part of the foreground. It'll select all this white area, all this clear area up here. I'm going to hit the delete key. Oops, sorry, I'm on the wrong layer. Go back to my layer where I painted the shadow, then hit the delete key to remove the section that was overlapping the clock where it didn't look like it belonged. Now that pretty much covers all my foreground material, or all my background is created now. So I'm going to press this button here, which is going to be, which I have set to be copy special, which means it's going to copy everything that's visible. I'm going to take it over here to this background. I've already cut me out from the self-portrait in the studio yesterday. This is what it looked like before. I changed the orientation a lot, straightened the image out a little bit too, but I've already masked this one out so we don't have to go through that process again. I'm going to paste that layer in, resize it so it fills my screen. And let's see. Resize it to fill my screen. Now, our figure here also needs a shadow. Just because it was shot in the studio and was shot with light coming from the similar direction that we have in our background, I have shadows here, but they were masked out when I did the mask. So what I'm going to do is make that visible, create another new layer between those two characters. Now I won't be able to see what I'm doing because I'm painting underneath this picture of the figure, but I'm going to paint in approximately where the shadow already is, so that when I turn that mask back on, you can see where the shadow should be from the real studio image. You can see where the shadow is supposed to be. Now I can paint it in a little better. Changing this to multiply mode like I have the others, and probably about that same 70-something percent, 77%. Take the shadow at the feet, which just grounds the figure to our image. Now, I'm going to go through and enhance a little bit on this image. And this is another script that I've written that we'll share later on after the webinar is over. All this script does, actually I can just show you what this script does. I've got a script that does this, that does these two steps together because it's a task I do all the time, so I wanted to automate it. I can copy everything visible to the keyboard or to the clipboard just like it is. And then I can paste it back in as a new layer on top of it. So now, up at the top, I have a layer that is a copy of everything I had before. That allows me to come in here now and use Nik Color Effects, which is another free plugin that you can get. PaintShop Pro is compatible with most other Photoshop plugins. So if there's a plugin that you have a favorite, you can find it for PaintShop Pro also. And I'm just going to come in here real fast and find a recipe I like that's going to blend my modes in. Probably this one. I want to change my highlight center point. And I can share this recipe as well. I think this one's one. Yeah, this is one I created. I'm going to add one more filter here. I'm going to colorize it. So that my color harmony works a little better across the image. Computer's running a little slow with the sharing the screen going on. Let's get it saved. Come on. And then the last thing I'm going to do is take last thing I would do with this image is take another layer ability, and these are the adjustment layers. Now you can add in all these different kinds of adjustments in as a layer. And one of the things that happens with this, let me bring up the one I want to use for this one. I'm going to go to the hue, saturation, lightness adjuster, and I'm going to decrease the saturation, just the saturation here, just a little bit, down to about 20-30%, or minus 30, I mean. It should be previewing on the image. And all that's done is reduce the saturation level just a little bit over all of the image. My computer's running a little slow again, so it's hard to say exactly what it's doing. Let me do that again with something that's more dramatic for a different adjustment layer. Let's do a histogram adjustment. Now the histogram will let us brighten up the image. We can slide the gamma slider back and forth. We can brighten up the image a great deal. We can darken the image down a great deal with the gamma slider. And I'm just going to take a little bit darker. And then we can take this mid-tone compress slider to either change the contrast to make it less contrast, or we can make a deeper contrast. Both of those are a little extreme, so I'm just going to do a slight adjustment to just a slight contrast change. Now, adjustment layers are powerful because you see this big white square here. What that is a complete mask. I can come in here now with a black brush and say I don't want to apply that mask to wherever I paint this black brush. And you can see as my screen's catching up with me, it has taken that adjustment off. Say it made this part too dark. I can paint black in this area here, and it will take it all off the shirt in the front, so we get our details back in the blacks here in the shirt. Now, one of the other things you'll get too with layers, if you start really getting into layers and doing a whole lot of different layers, is keeping track of what everything is. Now, this one here, it's fairly obvious what it is just by looking at the thumbnail. But some of these others, like this one here, it's hard to tell exactly what that was supposed to be. What you can do is, as you work along, you can come in here and you can click on this and rename this layer to anything you want to be. Rename this one to background. This one I can turn on and off to check what it was. This is my my shadow layer here. Go to meetings, making my computer run a little slow. Sorry for the delay. So we're going to name this shadow. This group is our guy. This was the duplicated visible layer. And we ran color effects on it, so I'm going to mark it all as color effects. And then our histogram adjustment layer. So you can come in through here and rename all the different layers however you need them to do, and change our blending modes on all of them. Let me go back real fast over here to this layer again, and we can do the same thing here. We have the clock face shadow. This is really helpful to be able to go through and name all the layers when you're going to be going away and leaving an image and then coming back to it after being gone from it for a while, because you'll forget what it was that you did, especially if you're applying several different things to it, like I did on this layer when I went through and applied multiple things from color effects. So let me go back to the background creation again. We'll go back to our different pieces, and we'll do it again one more time, a little slower this time, I think, just to show how those methods worked. Hope it's going to do that. Okay, I got to close that down. Bring all my pieces back together. I'm going to close this one. All right, let's go back to my background layer again, or my one that I started with. All right, I'm going to go through this one more time slower. To take the sky out, I use the Smart Selection brush. Just pull it across here. It selected all the blue sky clouds. It doesn't matter to me that I overlap the rocks just a little bit. If we zoom in here, you can see that I overlap the rocks just a little bit. It's not going to matter in the end for this one, because it's going to, let me hide selection. It's going to give me a hard edge on the rocks, which is what I wanted to have, is that hard edge. I'll go back over here, grab my clouds, copy into the clipboard, and I'm going to paste it into here. I'm going to select this select the layers there. Excuse me. When I did this mask, it created it all as a group. I can use this button here to collapse the group down to give myself more space, more empty space over here. I'm going to paste in that new layer. It pasted that new layer in on the top. So I click it, and drag it below the group. So now it's looking like it's behind those rocks. I'm just clicking and dragging. I'm in the pick tool here, so I can click and drag these clouds anywhere I want to. I can grab hold of these handles on the ends and resize them. And we'll have time for questions here at the end. If there's anything you want me to repeat, we can do that too. And then we buried the clock by taking this piece, taking our Smart Edge lasso tool, and going right along this corner. Oops. I'm going to promote that selection to a new layer of its own, and then I'm going to click and drag that layer to the very top. I come back over here to my clock face, which, as I said before, it's already been cut out. You can see where I've masked out the circle around it. Before, it was a picture of a grandfather clock that sits in my front hallway. I'm going to copy that to the clipboard just like it looks without the extra stuff on the edges, because it copies everything that's visible on the screen. I'm going to click here because I want to place it between these two layers. So I paste it in. Again, it's very huge. So I'm going to zoom out so that I can grab hold of the handles and resize it. A little smaller than that. I'm going to hit this button to bring it all back up to the size. I want to add the shadow to the clock face to match what's coming off the cliff. So I create a new layer. My color picker, so I'm going to pick a color from the shadow that kind of matches, because shadows have color. Now I'm just going to paint that in so that it kind of makes sense. I'll change that blending mode to multiply again, and the opacity down to 77%. I'll get some of this edge off of here because it looks kind of funny to me. I want to add one more edge right here along the front of the clock face. Also multiply. And then I think I added the shadow here in the front of the clock too. So we're going to add one more layer up here on the very top. Grab my paintbrush again. I want to get rid of some of that area, so I'm going to get a magic wand to select the area that I don't want the shadow I just painted to be on. So I'm going to go back and click delete for that selection. Change that to multiply and its opacity down. I'll take the eraser brush and clean up just a little bit of the edges so that it kind of looks better, matches better. And this time I didn't get the color exactly the way I want it from here to here, but it's pretty close. When I desaturate the colors later, it will match it up. So that ran through that background again. let's go ahead and add in the shadows for our guy one more time, since we have a few moments. Copied it to the clipboard. I'm going to bring this guy back up. I'm going to paste my background in. It's going to paste it actually inside the mask. So I'm going to have to drag that down below, outside of the group and below the group. That is the mask for our guy here. Resize it again. And then we're going to paint in his shadows again, but I'm going to use the shadows that existed in the original photo as a guide for that. So come down here again, create a new layer between those two. And I still have the same color selected for the shadows from before, so I can do this without having to color pick a new shadow. Turn my mask layer back on so I can see what I just painted. Fill in the rest of the shadow. Mostly just using it as a guide for the direction of the shadow and the width of the shadow to make it look better. Makes it look more realistic that way. And then this script that I was talking about before, all it does is copy what's visible to the clipboard and then paste it back again as a new layer so that I can make an adjustment on everything in a plugin like Nick all at once instead of having to do it on the individual layer pieces. So I did that. I came in here to Color Effects Pro. Found my recipes. Again, I can share this recipe as well. I want to colorize this. And what Colorize does is just adds a color layer in over the top of everything else. And it helps blend the color harmony together. Saving the file, or saving the image back to the application. It's actually a fairly big file. It's I think 5,000 pixels square, so it takes a little while to do that computation on a file that large. And that's pretty much the end of that composite again. I was going to desaturate. I desaturated it again the last time. Instead of saturation, instead of the layer, I'm just going to go in here and do the desaturation physically this time. There. And it just takes a little bit of that blue tone off that I added in. Makes it a little more black and white. A little more black and white looking, which adds to the surreal quality of it, which is what I was after here. So, I think that ties up that portion of the demo. If we want to answer some questions, Mel, do we want to go to that stage at this point?
Hi, Brad. Yep, there's a lot of questions I still haven't read yet, but I've got some questions here that we can start to address. So, this one I can probably answer on my own, but please jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. I have a question. Are scripts similar to presets? So scripts are similar to presets, but they're so much more. So basically, to create a script, or a script is basically recording a series of tasks so that you can automate something repetitive. So you can see Brad here is just hovering over the Start Script button on the Tool Options palette, or Start Script Recording button, sorry. But you can configure presets for your photos by creating a script. So that it runs the series of steps to create that preset. But you can also create scripts for other things. Like you could create a script to apply guidelines to your work area, you could create a script to save as soon as you open an image so that you don't save over an original image. So you can use them to, I guess, we have a utility script bundle for PaintShop Pro that does these kinds of, I don't know what I'd call them, tasks, I guess, for you that aren't presets at all. So Brad, does that kind of explain script?
And as you see, I've got one sitting right here in my ready to run button. As soon as I press this button, what this script here does is it will resize the image I want down to a web size version, which I think is 900 by 900, and adds my watermark to it down here in the bottom corner. So I just have to click that one button, then I save that file to a folder where I then can upload it immediately. So yeah, basically what she says, scripts are they're kind of like presets, but they're made for automating those repetitive tasks. I don't even. It's been so long since I've used Photoshop, I can't even tell you what the equivalent is in Photoshop. It's action. It's basically the equivalent of Photoshop action. But I think scripts are more powerful than actions, honestly.
Perfect. And yeah, we did a scripts webinar last month, and that can be found on our YouTube channel if anybody is interested in scripts and missed out on that webinar.
For those technical people out there, the script language is Python, I believe.
Yeah. All right, next question. It's a question about masks. What are they and how are they used? Okay, well, a mask is a very powerful tool in PaintShop Pro. And let me just let me find a good way to do this. Yeah, we'll do it right here. We'll turn that one off. I've already got a mask working here. Think of a mask as the stencils you would cut out for drawing a snowflake on a screen, where you would have a cutout. The snowflake, you'd have a solid sheet of paper with a snowflake cut out on it, and you could paint in where you want it, or whatever you put that snowflake over, you can see some of the stuff that's there, but not where the cardboard still is. Mask is the same way. The black is your thick cardboard. The white is your where you can see through it. So as you can see here, if I turn this mask off so you can't see, this is what the image looks like. By turning that mask on, it's only showing where this white is. Now, even further than that, you can also go with degrees of black and white. Right now, this mask is made up solely of black and white, but if I take a paintbrush that's somewhere in the middle, like this gray here, and I'll zoom in a little closer so you can see what it does. I can take that gray here, and where I paint in is going to make it about half transparent for that background. So it gives me just a little bit of a blending difference. Masks, you could practically do an entire webinar just on masks alone. There's a whole bunch of different things we can do with masks. It's a very powerful tool for helping. And the reason you want to use a mask instead of the eraser brush is the eraser brush is destructive. With a mask, if I came in here, I can say, okay, make this black. I can paint this out right here. Oops, I didn't really want to do that, so I'm going to select white, and I can get it back right away by painting white back into that same place. I get my image, part of my image back. If I use the eraser brush, I can't get back. I can't be guaranteed of getting back the information that I erase. So it's a little more powerful than an eraser. Hopefully that made sense. Thank you, Brad. And then another question is, do layers need to be stacked in a specific order to work properly?
It depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you're mixing a bunch of different blending modes, yes, the layer order will matter a great deal. But again, think of it as that as the paper dolls thing. So anything that you lay on top is going to partially obfuscate what's below that the thing you put on top. So if you've got your figure that is the base piece, you put on the dress piece next, you put on a blouse piece after that. The part of the blouse piece may cover part of the dress, or you can switch it around to have the dress be on top of the blouse so it looks like the blouse is tucked into it. It's that same basic concept for layers and using different pieces of the layers. See, right now, if I click on this group where our guy is, I didn't do this before. Click on the same group where the guy is. I can pick him up and move him wherever I need him to do. His shadow doesn't move with him because I didn't select that layer also, but I can pick him up and move him around, just like you would if you were actually playing with cardboard cutout pieces. Hopefully that answered that question.
Hey, Brad, can you confirm whether to change the name of a layer? Can you just show what you do to name a layer?
Okay, there's a couple of different ways you can do it. I was doing a shortcut way of doing it, but if you click on a layer here, you can right-click and use rename, and then type in whatever new name you want on there, and hit return to accept it. You can also right-click and go to properties. The name of the layer will show up right here, but you also have your blending modes, your opacities, everything on this screen, on this dialog. I just use the tools over here most of the time. I very rarely come to this dialog, but you can get all those, and you can get blend ranges, and that it gets really complicated when you start talking about blend ranges. But for the moment, this screen on the general page is where is the most important. That's where you can rename it to there, or if you do it right, you can just, if your layer is already selected, if you just single click on it once, it'll automatically give you a place where you can rename the layer as well. And again, hit return. So there's 3 different ways you can name the layer.
Perfect. I got another couple of questions about multiply. What does multiply do, and what's the difference between multiply mode and overlay mode?
Overlay mode is a lighter contrast version. That's what overlay would see. It's right now selected the shadow at his feet. Overlay is a slightly lighter version of multiply. All the different modes have parts and counterparts. Normal is everything is exactly the way you would expect. All the colors are treated exactly the way. The pixels are just simply laid over the top of one another. Darken will darken down things, lightens it up, of course. Multiply I use a lot. Multiply is the opposite of screen. What screen does, well, let me find a good example for what we can do for screen. Give me just a moment. Screen is great because it takes all the dark areas and masks them. If the darker it is, the more it gets masked out automatically, and the lighter it is, the more it brings it in automatically. And I'll show you a good example of that. I'm going to bring up a smoke layer. A smoke picture. So I had this picture of some fog that I created in my studio using a smoke machine. I'll copy it to the clipboard and I'll paste it over the top of my image that we're already working with here. Now screen, for instance, will take all that dark area and mask it out automatically and let the smoke show through, whereas multiply is the opposite of screen. It lets you see through the light areas and the dark areas show up. And then overlay is something in between that, where it makes the dark areas darker and the light areas lighter, and the midtones kind of go away. And hard light and soft light are the other 2 I use a lot. I'm sorry, what?
I just looked up in the PaintShop Pro help files, which is really handy for anybody who has questions like these when they're working away in PaintShop Pro and are trying to learn something, which you can just access through the help menu in the product. It's got definitions for multiply and for overlay. So multiply combines the colors of the selected layer with the underlying layers to produce a darker color, whereas overlay combines the multiply and screen blend modes.
Oh, it combines the 2 together. Yeah, that makes sense. That's what I kind of was saying. The midtones are what kind of disappears with overlay. That makes sense. Basically, there's no right or wrong way to do your layer blendings. Experiment and figure out what it is that you like best, what you think looks best at any given time. There's nothing gained, nothing lost by not doing it. So just keep playing with them until you find the combinations that work best for you and for your vision.
Perfect. Okay, next question. What tool did you use to erase the eyes, and are you able to show that step again?
Sure, I can go back to that real fast.
Thanks.
Let's just go to this one here, and we'll skip the background swap out this time. Come on. I didn't actually hit the edit button, sorry. All right. So what I did, and again, I decided I ran my script, which we'll share later, and all it does is creates two copies of the background that was already there, creates two copies of it, and then this middle one here, the one I just highlighted, it does a high-pass sharpen on it, and let's see what the exact settings on the high-pass sharpen were. Sharpness, high-pass sharpen. It remembers what your old settings were, so I can look at it this way. It was a radius of 7, a strength 100, and blend mode of soft light for that high-pass sharpen for anybody who was interested. You can also look into the script later on if you're that interested on what it did. Anyway, so it changed this layer to that did a high-pass sharpen on that layer, but this top layer is still a copy, basically the same copy of the background. So nothing changed because this top layer is covering everything that the high-pass sharpen did. Now, skipped over, I guess, earlier, was I took the eraser brush tool and then went in where the irises are, made the eraser brush just about the same size of the iris, and then I just very carefully erased just where the iris is, so that the high-pass sharpen layer underneath it just barely shows through. Now, if I turn off both my original background layer and that, you can see the very creepy version where I have erased out the irises of her eyes. I try to keep this black edge of the iris in the image, in the top image, correct, so that it blends better from the sharpened to the non-sharpened portion of the eye. It looks better in the end for me, or to me. But basically, you just use the eraser tool. And again, this is what I was talking about before with the eraser tool, where I erase those eyes. I can right-click and get that detail back, but not necessarily guaranteed of getting all of it back, which is why I use masks in places where I need to do that non-destructive edit. Let me bring that back up. And then the other thing that I did that may have done a little fast too is I went back to that middle layer where the sharpness had been done, and I used the paintbrush with a 20% opacity and a soft light blending mode. And opposite of where the catch light was from the studio lights, I just painted a little arc on the other side of the iris to give just a little bit of an extra highlight in the eye. You can see right here, especially on this camera right eye, you can see where I painted that highlight in, and then the difference that it makes. And when you zoom out, you can see the difference that it makes in the eyes. Now, since I have this sharpened layer here in the middle too, one of the other things that I sometimes will do in a fashion photo is I'll also go back, just like I did with the eyes, I'll also go back and erase just barely edge on the lips, and it gives just the lips just that extra shine as well. So the tool that I used for that was the eraser brush.
Thanks, Brad. Since you're on this portrait image, can you show how to remove the background in the headshot just one more time?
Sure. Let me use this button right here, which is it merges all my layers into one. Everything that's visible gets merged down into one. And now I'm going to duplicate layer again, so I can get a copy of that, paste it back on top. And I used Topaz Remask, and I have Remask 5 right here. This is currently my favorite tool for doing any masking at all, and it defaults in with the blue with this blue brush. And what the blue brush does is everywhere that the computer will see the blue, it's going to do a calculation for what it thinks should be the background and what shouldn't be the background. And since there's lots of flyaway hairs right here, I'm painting in this part right here too. And everywhere the blue brush is, it'll do this calculation. Everywhere where it's green, it's going to keep that no matter what. And everywhere that's red, it's going to cut that out no matter what. I press this compute mask button, and it creates this basic mask. Now, I wasn't really worried about the details for this image because of what I was doing, but this tool is very powerful because you can go through here also and say, show me what that looks like with a transparent layer. Show me what that looks like with a solid color behind it. And you can see places where it actually it did pretty well. So here's one that you can see a little too much of that gray background coming through here, and you can fine tune this. Again, this is a complicated thing. You can probably do an entire class just on how to use this tool. But I can go through here and say, okay, now that really should have been red, and it'll go through and do some fine tuning on it. There's some other sliders that'll let me get some recovery of details in it, but I'm not actually going to use that here in this case. I'm going to zoom out again so you can see the whole thing. Now when I click OK, it brings what I just did in there as a completely new transparent layer. It knocked out everything that I didn't want and kept the stuff that I did want. Now if you still need to actually have a layer mask at this point, what you can do is come here to the layers menu, go to New Mask Layer, and do a new mask layer from image. And we do it from this image that we have open. Any source opacity will be what it uses to create the mask. Click OK. And what it's done now is create me a mask that's exactly what is transparent. I now have a mask to work with. If I wanted to, I could take this background that I made a copy of earlier. I can drag it into that group. I'm going to delete the layer that Topaz Remask made. And now because it's behind this mask, I turn off the mask, I still have all that stuff behind. Because it's behind this mask, it's only showing me what I want to see. It's knocked out the rest of the background. And that's Topaz Remask that does that job.
Thank you, Brad. We've only got 3 minutes left, so I'm just going to do one more question, which is easy to answer. Actually, it's 2 more questions in one. Were these photos taken in RAW, the ones you're working with, and are you using a mouse, a tablet, or both?
Yes, I shoot everything in RAW, especially in the studio because sometimes my studio lights don't behave, and I have actually managed to save images when I don't have a studio light that fires when it's supposed to. And then my preferred thing is to use a trackball instead of a mouse. It's easier on the wrist for me, and it's a more natural movement for me than a pen. I've never been a fan of pens and tablets. I know I'm probably in the minority when it comes to photographers and artists that way, but I'm partially dysgraphic, so holding a pen in my hand is not really a natural state for me, so I generally use a trackball for all my editing.
Okay, great. So for anybody who I have not answered questions for through text or asked Brad the questions out loud, I'm going to, in tomorrow's follow-up email, I will have a questions and answers, so everybody's questions will get answered. So look out for that. I'm also going to provide some resources to some basic editing that you can do in PaintShop Pro. We've got a lot of content on Corel's Discovery Center. We've also got tutorials on YouTube. I'll see if I can find a basic like intro to layers video for you guys as well for anybody who was having a problem keeping up. But thank you so much, Brad. Your professionalism truly shines through. You know what you're doing, and you did a great demo today. Again, in that follow-up email tomorrow, should hit around noon Eastern Standard Time. I'm going to have a link for the PaintShop Pro upgrade discount, 40% off, as well as a coupon code to use in PaintShop Pro's welcome book for creative content, Corel applications, scripts, brushes, etc. Plugins as well. So, Brad, any closing remarks or anything? Or
yeah, if you can track me down through most of my social media channels via the PaintShop Pro Discovery Center, I believe. I think my social channels are listed there. And if you ask me any questions via those methods, I do my best to answer them. So I'm available. I'm fairly transparent when it comes to methods and things that I use. There are no secrets as far as I'm concerned. I'm just as happy to share information.
Great. All right. Thank you so much, Brad, again, and thank you everybody for attending. Have a great day.